a lot of these, wealthy billionaires have literally bought the properties that the plantation owners used to own. Like Larry Ellison is
You're like
point
a little
number
on the
1.
nose, you know?
It's
Yeah.
kinda strange. Yeah, I mean, imagine this, if you go to the island of Lanai, that island, every single Hawaiian, every person who lives there is both an employee and a tenant of Larry Ellison. That is very strange situation. I don't know where else that exists in our country.
Welcome to Forum. I'm Alexis Madrigal. What do we owe to our ancestors? In modern times, many people answer nothing. But Sara Kehaulani Goo's new book, Kuleana, describes the calling and commitment that she felt to hold on to her family's land in Hawaii, or to follow the real pronunciation more closely, Hawaii. She and many others in her family feel a duty to their ancestors that expresses itself as a duty to the land itself, a land that's now part of the regular old American property system with all its complications, taxes, and land use regulations. And Sara Kehaulani Goo joins us this morning here in the studio. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Alexis.
So let's just start with the land, right? The Aina, that's the
That's
Hawaiian word.
right.
Yeah. Tell us what it's like. I mean, where is it? What does it look like? Just kind of take us there a little bit.
Sure, yeah, let's go to Maui. This land is at the very end of the famous road to Hana. Many people have heard of this, I know, in this area. So it's remote, it's jungle rainforest, it's thick, full of hala trees. It's on the rainforest coast, big black lava rocks, wild shore, wild ocean crashing into the shore. And this land, about 90 acres of it, still exists in my family's hands. And it was given to my ancestor, if you can believe it or not, more than 175 years ago from King Kamehameha III. And this land is a legacy that
Mm,
still is one of the rare, Hawaiian lands in Hawaiian
yeah.
hands.
When did you first get to know this piece of land?
I was 8 years old. I grew up in Southern California, not in Hawaii, but on a first family trip, we hiked through this jungle forest with my great uncle, and my grandmother showed us this land and said, "This was land from the king." And it's still part of our family today. It's our kuleana is the word she used to describe it, meaning responsibility to keep it in our family. And she said it once extended from the land to the sea.
Mm.
And this is one of those stories, that you hear in your family. Some of us have other stories where I was like, is this story
You're
really
like, sure,
true?
we're descended from the king. Got
Yeah.
it. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, mom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think this is one of those stories I was like, I gotta check this out to see if this is really true. It sounded great, but we were standing on the land, so I kind of believed her that we had a part of it. But the story about it, I didn't know. It's one I always really wanted to find out the truth about, and so part of this book was figuring out whether this was the truth, and I was amazed to find out it was.
I mean, especially because adjacent to this land, right, in the kind of in the area near your properties, your family's property, there is this native Hawaiian temple, right?
Yeah.
So to tell us a little bit about that and how it played into your kind of family story.
Yeah, it felt like I was being let in on a not just the story of the land, but a family secret. And this was in the 1980s, so imagine I'm a eight-year-old kid, and I've just watched the movie Indiana Jones, and so we hiked through not only the land, but came upon this huge temple that was 4 stories tall, stacked rocks as tall as the eye could see, and it kind of went back into the jungle and disappeared. And I thought, "What is this huge edifice? Like, what is this huge tower? What was its purpose?" It clearly looked old, but I had nothing to explain to me what it was. All my great uncle told me was it was a secret, and we were not supposed to talk about it, and we were not supposed to tell anyone about it. We were not supposed to take anything from it. And so he told me it was a heiau, or a temple. That's the Hawaiian word for temple. And it was called the Pi'ilani Hale Heiau. Pi'ilani is a name of an old Maui king, chief, who once ruled Maui. But again, its story had been never really written down. I couldn't
Mm,
find a book about it. I couldn't go to my public library and check out a
mm,
book about it.
mm,
And as a kid, a lover of history, that also bothered me. So
mm,
I knew that there were stories about people that I was from because I had been there, been seeing things. But I think even as a kid, I knew that
mm.
there was more to the story that I needed to find out. And I wondered why people of Hawaii didn't have their own history
Mhm.
somewhere.
So you mentioned you grew up in Southern California. So what was your relationship to Hawaii as you're growing up and your heritage?
Well, like a lot of people in Hawaii, or of Hawaiian heritage, it's not, I'm many things. I'm a mixed plate, if you will. So, for my dad, I'm Hawaiian, Chinese, and Okinawan. And my mom's side is white and Caucasian. And I'm kind of East meets West. And I love that. I grew up in Southern California, where, of course, there's a mix of so many people from Asia, from the Middle East, from, all over. But I think that because saw few people who look like me, and my story was so different, I didn't meet a lot of other kids like
Mhm.
with my story. So I didn't feel like I quite fit in either way.
Mm,
And then we went to Hawaii. I wasn't Hawaiian enough,
mhm,
and so I think that it was fitting in was a little challenging.
mm,
But I think that I was always felt more Hawaiian than anything because that was the culture that my grandparents practiced. They danced hula. That was the food we ate more than anything. And I think, the land and the place, called them back. So they did
mm,
eventually. My grandparents moved back to Hawaii when I was in college.
mm. And it really right, your grandparents really are the kind of crucial kind of connection to your heritage that you had, right? And
Right.
and
Yeah.
they're and also your grandmother's brother.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, they kept the tradition alive. My grandmother in particular wanted to move back to Hana, wanted to move back to the place where the Hale wanted to build a home on her ancestral land. Unfortunately, she never achieved that goal. And she died, before that could be constructed.
Mm,
So I think that the crux of this book was, we found ourselves after she died with a huge property tax increase suddenly that had gone up like 500%. So we had to decide what to do with this property. She had never fulfilled her dream, but now what was our promise to her,
mm.
And I think a lot of people end up with that kind of inheritance, if you will, but this was obviously more than an inheritance.
Yeah, I mean, because part of this that we need to get to is kind of the history of Hawaiian dispossession, right? I mean, I think people have some sense of Hawaiian history, but maybe not the specifics. So maybe you could just lay it out for us. Like before colonization, like how did Native Hawaiian society work? Like what were people doing in Hawaii?
Right. Yeah, one of the reasons I wanted to write this book is I felt like, Hawaii is the only part of the United States that used to be its own independent nation, and it wasn't that long ago that it, was a colony, and yet we don't really know this part of its history. But Hawaii, was believed to be a population of about, half a million to as many as 800,000 people living in this isolated community
Mm,
in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, sustaining themselves, feeding themselves, had a whole system, a whole society where they were living, fishing, growing their own crops. I mean, pretty amazing. Voyagers. And now you look at where they are today, they're importing 90% of their food. They're importing, 9 million people visiting every year, unable to really house all the people, unable to really sustain a lot of middle class jobs. It's kind of a broken system.
mm,
I think the capitalist system is not, for the most part, working for a lot of working families
yeah.
there.
So going back or kind of staying in the 19th century before, in this kind of colonization
Yeah.
period, I mean, how did the Hawaiian monarchy kind of respond to contact with these sort of European colonists?
Yeah. So just to what happened was how our family got land was what first happened was the Hawaiian people didn't initially believe in owning individual pieces of land, but they did finally allow the privatization of land only after the monarchy was convinced of that from after Christian missionaries came in the 1820s, after business people came, foreigners convinced the monarchs that they should change their system and allow crops to be grown for exports. Soon after that, so the Great Mahele of 1846 is what allowed King Kamehameha to divide his land and gave our family our property as part of that process. And it wasn't just our family; it was many, many other properties that were finally allowed to be privately owned. And once that happened, a lot of Native Hawaiians lost a lot of their land because this foreign concept of ownership, they didn't understand. They didn't understand then what happened is you needed to survey your land, what you needed to claim your land, you needed to pay taxes on your land. All of those steps that followed were foreign concepts and the paperwork that followed. So that dispossession quickly followed
Yeah.
because the systems were foreign.
Well, and you had mainland European Americans who this is what they just done to the entire western part of the United States, right? I mean, just carved up a bunch of indigenous lands and arrive in Hawaii and do the exact same thing.
Exactly, and it was that brought in the sugarcane plantations, that is what brought in other systems that restricted resources, water resources. The sugarcane plantation owners then went to the top of the mountains and said, "We're gonna divert the water sources to feed our cane plantations." That then affected everybody else's way of life. That then led to, less irrigation for other native farmers. That then led to, the climate to change, in other parts of the island. So you see how that immediately changes the way of life for everybody else,
Hmm.
and the impacts of that are still being felt today.
Yeah. We're talking with Sara Kehaulani Goo, who's a journalist and author. She's got a new book out. It's called Kuleana. And this book really explores her family's relationship to the ancestral land that they have in Hawaii amidst these kind of pressures of capitalism and displacement. She's doing an event tonight at Manny's in the Mission. It is at 6 p.m. And they're going to be talking about the book, and there'll be a performance by a hula group as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so excited. I'm gonna be talking with Kumahula Patrick Mukukane, and his hula group will be doing a short performance. I'm
Yeah.
so honored.
We also want to hear from you. Is there a piece of land or property that represents your family's legacy? Maybe you have had an experience with Hawaiian real estate, or you've felt called by a sense of duty in your own family legacy. You can give us a call. The number is 866-733-6786. That's 866-733-6786. The email address is forum@kqed.org. You can find us on social media, Blue Sky, Instagram, all of those things. We are KQED Forum. I'm Alexis Madrigal. Stay tuned for more right after the break. Welcome back to Forum. I'm Alexis Madrigal. We're talking with Sara Kehaulani Goo, who's a journalist and author, about her new book, Kuleana, which really traces her family's relationship to a piece of land that they have in Maui that was given to them by one of the last kings of Hawaii. So let's talk a little bit about the family's land and the sort of the series of discoveries that you were able to make. I mean, as a fellow journalist, there's a part in the book where you go to visit your great uncle, and he pulls out a big old box filled with manila folders, and basically in there are most of the most of the answers to questions that you have had for your whole life.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. For me as a journalist, we love the paper trail. We love to follow the paper trail, to get answers, to document, what
Hmm.
actually is the story, what are the answers that we're searching for. And for me, this was the holy grail. It was, I had been searching for answers to what we talked about earlier, which is what's the story of this land?
Yeah.
The mountain to the sea, the land was vast from the king. And I knew that we had 90 acres in the family. My grandmother had 10 acres of this land left. What astounded me is I learned, Alexis, that this land was once 990 acres.
Mm-hmm.
It blew my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it really was from the mountain to the sea.
Yeah, yeah,
And so the question was, where did all that land go from 175 years ago to today?
yeah.
And answers were in that box.
Huh.
And I went through, and my uncle, thank goodness, he was a record keeper.
Yeah, he was like a bookkeeper
He
at a
was
local
his
resort,
yes,
right?
his day
Yeah,
job was the
a local
record.
hotel.
Yes. I think many of us in our families have a record keeper who's like the genealogist, and thank goodness for these people in our
Definitely.
lives, and thank goodness for my Uncle Tucky because he was the one in our family. But he had recorded, and I went through this box and found decades of, uncles and aunties who had sold, 10 acres here, 50 acres here, leased, sold to the sugar plantation, later to the ranch, to the owners, the family members of the sugar plantation and the ranch. that then bought the sugar plantation. And so I realized in that moment that the story of my family's land was the story of Native Hawaiians' land,
Mhm.
and that my story was really their story. And that's why I wanted to
Mhm.
tell the story in this book, is I realized the story hadn't really been told in this way,
Mhm.
and that the 990 acres might as well have been told in the story of the islands, because
Mhm.
now this ranch land today is up for sale. Um,
Mhm.
you look at it on Zillow. I mean, it's on for sale for $77 million.
Oh my
And
god.
guess who's gonna buy it? I mean,
Who's
pi
gonna yeah,
the
tech
pick
elite,
your
right?
billionaire.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
I mean, that's who owns a lot of Hawaii's land today,
yeah.
is some of the biggest billionaires. So that's the story of Hawaii's land.
Yeah. And it's really interesting, there's just a section in the book where you go through a series of these kind of land transactions, and you realize that it wasn't one big sweeping order. Your family wasn't swept off the land all at once.
Right.
It was kind of nibbled away at, all these different daily problems turning into a land sale here, a lease there, a mortgage there.
Yeah, and I think that that's maybe why it hasn't been something that people have paid attention to, even outside of Hawaii. It's been this slow boil, it's been this generational churn.
Mhm.
And I think that even when I'm in Hawaii, I've told people I'm writing the story about how we've lost our land. And Hawaiian people I talk to are like, oh, yeah, that's not a new story, because they all have had that happen to their family.
Right.
They're like, oh, yeah, we lost our land, like that is a common story. It is not a new story, sadly.
Yeah.
But they don't, like, outside of Hawaii, that is not something that people
Right,
know.
right. I mean, it does bring up for me a lot of connections to what has happened in, say, traditionally Black neighborhoods in, the Bay Area, where you have, people who owned homes, maybe take out a reverse mortgage here, or maybe end up renting it out there, and then there's a problem, or end up selling it to somebody.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you know about how your family might have benefited from some of these transactions over time? Do we know any of those things?
I don't know. I do know that a lot of them left this part of left Hana, Maui. A lot of them left Maui altogether. It's a
Mhm.
really rural area. It's not an area where, it's easy to make a living. There's not a lot of jobs. A lot of them left for Honolulu. A lot of them left for the
Right.
mainland. And that also is the story of Native Hawaiians. Now, in the most recent census in 2020, we now know that a majority of Native Hawaiians live outside of
Hmm.
Hawaii,
Hmm.
and often that's not by choice. So that's the story of an economic displacement that's happened. That's not necessarily a land displacement, but it is about the cost of living. It is about how do we afford to live in the place where, at the end of the day, people are, competing against, in a finite place of real estate. They are
Mhm.
competing for, with the world's richest,
Yeah.
people.
I mean, how do you try and square the sort of spiritual aspect of this, which you talk about quite extensively in the book, with just kind of the Zillow-ness of it, I guess, you know? It's just like it just feels like it's two totally different kind of
Yeah.
registers in human experience.
Yeah, I think that, this book also was about we talked about history and family and journalism and trying to uncover your own story, but I think it was also a personal journey, because the book is titled Kuleana, but your responsibility, but I think I had to kind of retrain my own brain about thinking in my own Western capitalist, way of thinking, to a Hawaiian way of thinking about land, right? At one point, I had even been, the real estate editor at the Washington Post, so
Right.
I understand real estate.
Right.
I understand how that works,
Yeah.
but I think that land in this case, going back to the way Hawaiian people live, land aina means that which feeds, right? It is about that connection. And if Hawaiian people don't have that connection to the land, they don't have, that is part of their identity. That is part
Mm.
of who they are. It
Mhm.
is what connects them to a
Mm.
place.
Mm.
And I think that is what called me back. And that it
Yeah.
was like the solving this problem of keeping the land in our family was not about money. We had to figure it out using money, of course, but it was more about this connection, and how committed are we as a family to keep that going?
I'd actually love that you show in the book that there isn't one relationship that Hawaiians have to the land. Some of the family members didn't have a very deep connection. Others were willing to go out and, work the land with their own hands, right? I mean, there's a
Yeah.
whole wide variety within the family of their kind of relationship to this place.
Yeah, it's not about blood quantum. It's not about where you live or where you grow up necessarily, and maybe that's controversial to say, but, and that was part of my discovery as someone who today lives, 5,000 miles away from Hawaii. I live in Washington, DC, so I had to wrestle with that myself as, like, who am I to, decide that I have, agency or I have a place here? But I think at the end of the day, the fact is that, I my grandmother is very meaningful to me as we have a special relationship, and, I'm she's my grandmother, so
Yeah.
that's all, right? Like, I feel like if this calls you, then you have to act
Yeah.
on it.
It's not like there's an ancestry police who gets to come
Yes,
in and,
right.
like, designate, give you a permit to, be Native
And I
Hawaiian.
feel like sometimes for people, and I've talked to a lot of other Hawaiians and other people, like, who are of mixed race, and they feel like, "What am I? Am I not?" And I think, like, who are you waiting for to, like, tell you? You have to act on this. This is something for you to decide.
Yeah, yeah.
There's no one who's going to be policing this.
Let's bring in a caller. Let's bring in Kimberly in Pacifica. Welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for taking my call. Sarah, I just really wanted to thank you so much for this book. I am Native Hawaiian, and interestingly enough, my daughters are in their 20s, and we had just gotten back from a trip to the Big Island where we visited family, went over family history, aunties who were, in their 90s,
Mm,
giving us our roots. And it's interesting. We grew up in the Bay Area. I am Native Hawaiian, but it's that your book and the way that you describe your relationship to
mm,
Hawaii and really trying to find your roots, it's so resonated with me and my daughters. In fact, my daughter finished the book on her way home on the flight. And what she sent me by text was, I'm in tears, Mom. This book was
Oh.
so impactful, and finding our Hawaiian heritage meant everything to me. So your story really mirrored so much what we were going through as a family. And I just want to thank you because it was so beautifully written. While blood quantum doesn't mean a lot, it does if you're trying to get into Kamehameha or you're in the
That's
islands and
true.
you're Hapa and you're living on the mainland when you go. But finding your roots, it was so beautifully written, and how
mm,
you share that, you didn't always feel like you belonged. So I just
mhm.
wanted to thank you so
Yeah.
much. I'm looking forward to seeing you at Manny's
Oh, thank
this
you.
evening.
Oh, mahalo,
Yeah.
mahalo
Mhm.
nui for sharing that. That's so sweet.
Yeah. Thank you,
Yeah,
Kimberly.
thank you. And I hope, I think that, I wanted to write a story to help, the real story, really, actually, of Hawaiian people be seen and shared. I feel like, Hawaii, its narrative, I think, has been falsely kind of presented by Hollywood and tourist brochures for so long. And I felt like it, like with the real Hawaii, I experienced, I didn't see, and
Mhm.
I wanted one book on the shelf at least to be there, so that means a lot. Thank you so much, and I also feel like a lot of the things I'm writing about are not just unique to Hawaii, like, the things about what really matters in family, what we owe those who come before us and those after us, like you started with the show with, Alexis, are, I think, a lot of they're through and true for many
Yeah.
cultures.
Well, and there was also a period in many, an assimilation period in many cultures.
Yes.
And one of the things that's beautiful about this book is it's also your rediscovery kind of parallels the rediscovery of Hawaiian culture by Native Hawaiians.
Yeah.
Like at one point, you share in the book that the number of Native Hawaiian speakers was down to 2,000 people. And we actually have a clip of your great grandmother, Milaka,
Mhm.
right? Who's speaking on a local radio show in 1976. And the show's host had actually sought out Native Hawaiian speakers to capture their sound since the language appeared to be, and we'll get to this, appeared to be dying out. So let's listen into Sarah's great grandmother, Milaka.
Ho'olaulea. 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 Mokumakahiki. Iba kalu kumahiku. O kumakahiki. O ke e makahiki. Ui kumaiwa kanahiku kumahiku. U ho'omaka ia ke I ho'olaulea. I loko o ke kimapa. E kahi. Ai ho'oku iana. Iana wale. Kanakulu kumakahi. Lao pe.
Tell us a little bit more about this story of the Hawaiian language and your great grandmother.
Oh my goodness. What a treat that, first of all, that your listeners got to hear that. I mean, listening to people speak Hawaiian,
Yeah.
gosh, I wish I could actually translate that for you. I don't speak Hawaiian. I've started to take Olelo or Hawaiian language classes, but it gave me the chills just now. Thinking it, every time I hear it, it gets me the chills. But this is an amazing story. Most indigenous languages, as you know, is a sad story, and they are, dying. But the Hawaiian language is, a rare case where it's reviving and it's coming back. And now when you go to, the airport and you see kids, you hear the language, even on the radio.
Hmm.
So the story begins with the that you just played. In the 70s, a man named Larry Kimura and some other students said, "We don't want the language to die." They saw that all the people who are still speaking Hawaiian were older people. There were elderly people like my great-grandmother from remote places where Hawaiian was still being spoken. He made it a point to record all of the people he could find who were still living. She was one of them. He started a radio show in Honolulu, and people heard it and they thought, "This is amazing. I want to understand what they're saying." They advocated and lobbied the state legislature to bring back Hawaiian language into the schools, to teach children, to teach preschool, to teach it. It had been banned,
Mm.
It had been banned with the overthrow of the Hawaiian kingdom, and they won.
Mm.
And it's amazing. So what did they do? They started at preschool. They said have to start young when children can learn and absorb languages so much better than adults,
I
as
know.
we know.
Yeah.
They developed a preschool program. Then they developed a kindergarten program, and so on. They kept building until they got through high school. Then they pushed for a college program at the University of Hawaii. Today, you can earn a PhD.
Mhm.
Just a few months ago, I was out at the Big Island at the University of Hawaii, and I saw they're building the language program, the University of Hawaii's Hawaiian Studies program. I mean, it was an amazing accomplishment that they have done this. And now, tens of thousands of people speak Hawaiian at home.
Yeah.
I'm so jealous. I wish I
Yeah,
was
right.
I wish I were one of
Got
them.
that.
But you can learn on Duolingo, you can learn, online. I have a tutor who learned and grew up in that program.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
I mean, it's nice to have a success story in indigenous language revitalization, you know? I mean, I think
Yes.
there's like there are many other groups that are trying to get there, but this is one where like the effort of this Hawaiian Renaissance like really has worked and it's really paid off.
It has. I think it's so inspiring. I'm inspired by it. I think others can be inspired by it, and I hope they keep going. I
Yeah.
really do.
Let's return to the land, you know, and keep coming back to Aina, keep
Yeah.
coming back to land. The your family has had a difficult time kind of uniting around what to do, right? Because, you know, because this land goes back so far, there's just a lot of stakeholders, as we
Yeah.
might call it. How have you tried to figure out what to do? Like, do you have
Yeah.
a big Google Doc? Like, how does this work? Yeah.
Yeah, so when we got notice that our family land property tax had gone up by 500%, we were like, this is, we have to solve this immediately. Like a lot of Hawaiian families, our family is very big. My dad's one of 8 siblings. And so this was not something that you just write a check. This was something that involved many siblings, grandchildren, or children of those siblings who are all living everywhere from California to Massachusetts. And, and then there are other properties adjacent to that one that we knew might get the same bill, right? Because we had gotten the bill. And those families that are my dad's cousins live on Oahu, live on Maui. So it became a very complex situation very quickly. And not everybody knows everybody, not everybody's very close, and so just imagine your own family and your own
Mm.
relationships, and not everybody agrees. So we quickly had to figure out, how do we quickly get on the same page? How do we quickly get organized? And this, I really
Mm.
credit my father for doing this, but we quickly had to hatch a plan, and he really led a lot of those efforts. A lot of Zoom calls. This happened during COVID. But
Yeah,
we did eventually, I think, get on the same page and quickly understand, like, at least, how do we get this land? What are our options?
yeah.
And we hatched out some quick options for
Yeah.
ourselves.
We're talking with Sara Kehaulani Goo, who is a journalist and author, about her new book, Kuleana, which explores her family's relationship to this ancestral land and Hawaiian culture amidst the pressures of, capitalist development and displacement. We want to hear from you. What's coming up for you as you hear this story about Hawaiian culture and land? The number is 866-733-6786. That's 866-733-6786. The email is forum@kqed.org. And of course, on social media, Blue Sky, Instagram, Discord, we're KQED Forum. I'm Alexis Madrigal. Stay tuned for more right after the break. Welcome back to Forum. Alexis Madrigal here with Sara Kehaulani Goo, who's a journalist and author. She's got a new book out. It's called Kuleana. She's going to be at Manny's tonight at 6 p.m. talking about the book. Before the break, we were talking about the kind of complexities of land that comes to you through the family. And Melanie in Santa Rosa, welcome. You've got a story like this.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. So my father's Lebanese. He was born and raised in Lebanon, left during the Civil War of the 1980s. And he has land that is passed down through his family in Lebanon, in the mountains of Lebanon. And lately we've been talking about how that will be passed on to us, the next generation, my siblings and I. There are 7 of us siblings. We all grew up here in California. And yeah, it's something that is a little bit tricky because honestly, we don't live in Lebanon. We do visit. We've seen the land. There are squatters on the land. In fact, when we went a couple years ago, there part of the land had actually been given to a neighbor. If you're not there to manage it, weird things happen, right? And
Yeah.
so, yeah, so we kind of have told him we would prefer to almost not really inherit the land. And we have cousins that grew up in Lebanon. My dad's siblings, some of them stayed there. I'd almost rather it go to them. They're there, they're in person, they can manage it. And I know that upsets my dad a little bit because he sees it as a legacy and something he's passing on to his kids. And so, but just for me personally, I think it makes sense for it to stay with the people there. That it should be managed by people there.
Yeah.
So all this talk has that.
Oh, it's
through my head
such
too.
Melanie,
Yeah.
thanks so much for that. What it really strikes at for me is the way that inheritance is both an opportunity, it's a duty, it's also a burden at
Yeah.
times, right? It's like
Yeah.
hard for people to talk about that. But of course, when it gets this concrete form of the land and you
Mhm.
got to do something with it, someone's got to manage it. Like, what are you
Yeah.
going to push the squatters off the land from California? There's all these things that are so complicated in this, and this obviously shows up in your book in a
Yeah.
variety of ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting question, and, like, I think that this, book, that a lot of the themes are about this generational conversation and this generational duty, if you will. And let me talk a little bit about the meaning. We haven't talked about this, but the meaning of the word kuleana.
Mm-hmm.
I talked about, it doesn't mean responsibility, but a lot of Hawaiian words have multiple meanings. And so the word, responsibility in our Western brain means, like what you just said, this thing I have to do, this thing on my the checklist that we have running in our brains. It's like, ugh, I have to do this thing. But kuleana, to me, actually means something quite different. It is actually a generational responsibility, is how I've come to understand it in the context of this land. I don't know if this is helpful to the caller
No, no,
or
no.
not,
Yeah.
but it is really about honor and privilege responsibility. So think of it as something that it is chosen for you, that your grandparents or your parents is passed down to you and will be passed down to your children. So it is more lasting in responsibility. And so the Kuleana that you hear in Hawaii is more like about caring for your taro patch or caring for your fish pond or caring for your family's the irrigation or the stream that flows through your land or the land itself. It is more like the natural resources that help feed and care for the people who need it and that will need it going forward. So if you think about that is something that extends beyond you, um, that is more of your honor and your privilege of your responsibility. It is not to apply for the daily tasks that we're talking about, but I think that that is how I've come to understand it. So the land in this is actually not about that kind of responsibility. It is more about the generational
Yeah.
responsibility.
Huh. So how did that end up applying in your family's case? Like, what did you end up deciding to do with this land?
Well, we decided that we would try to keep it in our hands no matter what. The point was not really to develop it. That kind of frees us from making real estate decisions, if you will.
Hmm.
The point is, if our responsibility is to keep it in our family hands, because that is the promise that we have made for 175 years and we will make as part of our legacy to the Hawaiian kingdom and on the Kahanu family, then that is what we have honored to do and
Hmm.
care for, and the heiau as well. So those two, that is our family's kuleana, and if we remain true to that, then that's what we're here for.
Hmm. Um, Talk a little bit about what happened to the land near your families with this heiau
Mhm.
and sort of how that has become part of the kind of longer and kind of broader legacy of your family there.
Well, I mean, luckily, our family, and our not just my grandmother, but her cousins
Right, the
and
sort of extended
the
family, I should
extended
say.
family, yeah. I mean, I think that, most of it is very, raw and developed, just as it has been, when the day when the king gave it to our ancestor. And I think that that's very appropriate. There's a dirt road that runs through it. It's along the coast. You can hike there. A lot of my cousins go fishing there off the shore. One of our family members has a house and lives there. But on either side, there are a few neighbors that have, foreigners who come and have built homes, vacation homes. It's not a place that attracts the typical wealthy billionaire, to be honest. Hana's a real chill, remote kind of place. It has attracted people who kind of want to escape from the world.
Mm,
So I think that it has remained, just as it has for a very long time, and I think it will be. It's not the kind of place that is, a lot of tourists go,
yeah.
which is, I think, has its benefits.
Some of our listeners want to talk about sort of what's been happening in Hawaii more generally. Matthew writes, I've spent a lot of time in Kauai where Mark Zuckerberg bought the old Terra plantation, took
Hmm.
vast plots of land adjacent to his palatial estate, and tried to block access to a wonderful nude beach. Oprah seems to have claimed Maui, and Larry Ellison basically owns the entire island of Lanai. How do these billionaires encapsulate ongoing colonization, and what are the possibilities now for local forces of resistance?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good point, and I think it's kind of touches on what we talked about, like, earlier, and truly, a lot of these, wealthy billionaires have literally bought the properties that the plantation owners used to own, like Larry Ellison is
You're like
point
a little
number
on the
1.
nose, you know?
It's
Yeah.
kinda strange. Yeah, I mean, imagine this, if you go to the island of Lanai, that island, every single Hawaiian, every person who lives there is both an employee and a tenant of Larry Ellison. That is very strange situation. I don't know where else that exists in our country. But I think what it is, and I think this is maybe a difficult conversation to have here, but like, I think there are places we need to think about responsible real estate investing. Because when you talk about Hawaii, where there's a real limited amount of real estate, every acre that a billionaire is buying up, or even a person is buying a second home and it is sitting empty, that is really driving up the cost for everybody else who lives there. And it is less housing for local people. And so,
Mm,
on Maui, for example, which is dealing with the real impact of the fires 2 years ago, what you have is a situation where rental homes make up 20% of the housing stock. They sit empty for a lot of time. And now it's not that people displaced by the fire, there isn't housing for them. It's just the housing that does exist is not affordable for them.
Mm.
And so it is a really difficult situation right now where, homelessness has been driven up as a result, and prices have only increased. And the average home on Maui is $1.3 million.
Yeah. Well, and what that's meant, right, is that people are living in tents on beaches, right?
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's like a situation many people here are familiar with. These are working homeless people who go
Yes.
live on the beach in a tent and then go work in a resort.
They're driving your bus from, the airport shuttle.
Yeah. Let's bring in another caller here. Let's bring in David in Palo Alto. Welcome.
Hey, how you doing? Thanks for taking my call. So this is reminding me, my dad just recently passed in January. I was going through some of his paperwork, and it come to find out that my family, going back to Emancipation Proclamation and what we just went through Juneteenth, that as a Black family, we were probably one of the first families that inherited or was given some property back in the 1800s. And I can see through his paperwork that had been slowly kind of whittled away here and there. Back in 1962, well before I was born and he even met my mother, he tried to sue to get some of the property back. And basically the government in Texas said, nope, you don't have a right to sue. So I can kind of see how this is a parallel. It's really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. David, this is fascinating. I mean, I remember reading some years ago about the dispossession of Black farmers like throughout the South, right? As you're up against a lot of forces, right? And this land can, you gesture at it in your book. It's hard to tell when these lands are sold or mortgaged or whatever it is, were these actually did people really have a choice? And David, thanks for calling. I'm sorry about your dad as well.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that what the paper trail shows you is there's all these systems that are set, the legal systems, the bureaucracy that is just set up that, at least for me, I found that my family was fighting every generation. And this property tax situation that we were fighting was just today's version of that, but there was always something. And there will be something else, I'm sure, for me and my children. We will be ready for it. But that was the lesson that I saw in that trove of documents. And I think it's important to document your family's history, those record keepers we talked about. I think
Yeah. Are you
everyone
now
should.
the keeper of the box?
I am, I think. I think I have no choice.
You wrote in the book that there's a difference between heritage and identity.
hmm
How did this kind of struggle to figure out what to do with the land, think about the land, visit the land? How did that help you answer that or that question between
Yeah.
heritage and identity for yourself?
I think that's a good question. I think that the land situation, I think I had to figure out, well, even if we solve this problem with the land, like, so what, right? We may solve it today, but that doesn't mean that, my kids will, I have to have faith that they'll understand it, in 20, 40 years after I die, right? I needed to make sure that if I didn't pass on the culture and the importance of that culture to them, that will have been for naught, right?
Mm.
And so my answer to my own identity and my cultural connection was, it wasn't enough to just go to Hawaii. I needed to have a cultural practice. I turned to hula.
Hmm.
And believe it or not, I found a hula halau, a hula school in Washington, D.C. I brought my children with me, and we were going to practice our hula together. And that was so fulfilling. And I felt like, this is a way for my children. When you do hula, when you dance, you have to know the language. You have to learn the language. You're doing storytelling. It is truly
Mhm.
the best way to practice your culture. So that was one way to
Literally embodying the culture, right?
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So that was one way to realize that I had to put some skin in the game. I had to really, truly not just solve one problem, but I had to really look inside and I had to solve it for myself. I had to figure out, as a parent, how do I keep this going? It goes back to, what we were talking about earlier about Kuleana, is like, what does this mean going forward for this next generation? And I realized I had a generational responsibility. I think in our culture today, we're so focused on the me, the now, that we kind of lose sight of the bigger picture of what is happening next. What am I really here for in the larger context? So that was my awakening.
Yeah. Let's bring in caller Dawn in Mountain View. Welcome, Dawn.
Good morning. Thanks for this interesting conversation. I'm a scientist. I'm a geologist. I'm a volcanologist, and I work with scientists at Hawaii Volcanoes Observatory. And I'm actually going to be looking at samples from Kilauea today in my lab.
Oh, wow.
So cool.
And the scientists there in particular are very, very familiar with this concept of Kuleana, where they send me samples here in California. We analyze them, and they're returned back to Hawaii when we're finished. So I have 20 or 30 samples I need to return, but they are eventually returned back to Hawaii to close that circle of bringing the Kilauea Pele samples back to Hawaii. You had just mentioned, the kind of generational thing. I think you can kind of apply this scientifically. A lot of samples geologically are kept with one scientist, and maybe they'll be passed on to follow-on scientists. But by returning these samples back to Hawaii Volcanoes Observatory, this allows additional studies and additional learning from these samples from Kilauea, if you want to speak to it that way. But there are people in this, at least at Hawaii Volcanoes Observatory and here at the USGS in Mountain View, who are very familiar with this concept. So we support it and want to protect it as well. Thanks.
That's beautiful. Don, thank you so much. I do like just thinking about the ways that you think Kuleana can be applied in other contexts, not to just purely adopt, a Native Hawaiian concept, but just as a way, a mode of thinking.
Yeah, I love that. I didn't know that, Don, and that's really cool. But it doesn't surprise me, actually. And I feel like this concept is Hawaiian, like you said, Alexis, but I do think it's something Hawaiians can teach the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Kim writes in to say, as a non-Hawaiian who lived in Hawaii for 11 years, it was impossible to avoid the sadness which permeated any discussion of ancestral lands. The scars of the U.S. takeover of an independent monarchy lived on in the psyche of the people. The only people who profited were the missionaries' descendants. What do you think? I mean, as someone who would travel to Hawaii, say, what's a way that they can be respectful of this legacy?
Yeah, I get that question a lot. And I think that, one of the reasons I wrote this book is really just to bring awareness. I think that 9 million people visit Hawaii every year, and I think so few people just even understand its history and its context. They understand aloha, they understand, maybe they pick up a few words, maybe they understand the language, but I think Hawaii is doing a better job of making the culture an intentional part of the experience beyond the kind of performative part of it. They've been smart about putting Native Hawaiian leaders in charge of tourism, believe it or not, in the last several years, but there's a lot more work to do. And I wanted to help inform the curious traveler a bit more. And that's just a start. But I think also realize that when you're going there, come with an open mind, understand the place you're entering. When I travel, I want to learn about a history and a place of everywhere I go. And I feel like, there are a limited number of books about Hawaii that truly offer that. There are a lot, but there are a number of them. But I think that this was a way, and by telling my family story, to tell a larger story.
Yeah. We have been talking with Sara Kehaulani Goo, journalist and author, about this new book, Kuleana, exploring her family's relationship to their ancestral land. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This is great.
Yeah.